Welcome to the Stone Cold Truth. Today is Saturday, March 25th, 2017. I'm your host, Tyler Nixon, with, co-host, I should say, of course, the man himself, the man whom the Stone Cold Truth is named after, Roger Stone, is going to be joining us shortly. It's been a crazy week, lots of action in Washington on Capitol Hill, as well as, of course, the House Intelligence Committee hearings, in which we saw basically the Democrat defamation artists at work. Much ado about nothing, inflating charges, scurrilous charges against Roger and others, frankly, based on no evidence whatsoever that anyone has presented. It's really amazing to me that these people get away with this, frankly. It reflects what the Democrats have been for years, which is frankly just liars. They make anything up that they want. I mean, the fake news is really just the media extension of the Democrat Party and its hardcore leftist leadership at this point. There are no more moderates. There is no dissension. There is no divide within the Democrat Party, within the Democrat congressional ranks. It's purely leftist, purely vituperative, purely attack, purely megalomaniacal. They absolutely lust and thirst for power, will do anything for it. That's why I think we've seen this collective insanity going on. I think they really lost their minds when Donald Trump won, and they lost Congress. They were so hepped up and hyped up to be in charge once again and riding high with a good old Hillary in the saddle. They actually believe their own BS, I guess, as Barack Obama once said about himself. And he certainly does believe his own BS, and few other people do, I think, outside, again, of the hardcore ranks of Democrat leftists. We're going to be going through some of these, what I call the rogues gallery of Democrats who have coordinated, particularly on the House side. The Senate's been a little less disgusting in its defamation of people like Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, and others, anyone involved in the Trump campaign or in the Trump universe. But it's just, if you watch the House Intelligence Committee hearings, it really is a disgrace, I think. It makes McCarthyism, it gives McCarthyism a bad name, if that's possible. And of course, McCarthy isn't giving Joe McCarthy a bad name, because McCarthy, in a sense, in many ways, was correct in the end, despite his tactics. I think he went a little overboard, but Joe McCarthy was right. There were communists, there were infiltrators within our government, there were high-level leftists who were essentially traitors. Alger Hiss coming to mind, of course, brought to light and exposed by the very much mentor and former boss of Roger Stone, my distant relative, President Richard Nixon. And brought to light McCarthyism. Really, nowadays we have the exact opposite. They manufacture completely. Really, these are, in the original sense, the original definition of McCarthyism. The current Democratic Party they are truly McCarthyites. They invent facts, they invent news, they invent anything they can to get themselves in the spotlight, to create this fog of, and the appearance of fog. It's not even, it's smoke and mirror. I mean, you can't even say smoke has substance to it, actually. It's more of a fog. It's more of a mist, a gray, putrescent mist that they emanate, frankly, from Capitol Hill, from their perches, wherever they may be, led by Nancy Pelosi, the whack job of all time. Really, this person, Nancy Pelosi, it's very sad, in a sense, to see people hang on to positions of such lofty power as, the House Democratic leader, when they really are in the early stages of dementia. Either that, or they're really not on the right meds, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. And it really boggles the mind in many ways what they're able to forward and get this echo chamber going within the mainstream media, Fox News being really the only respite. I mean, it's kind of a joke that Democrats would attack Fox News for years and years and years. I mean, you don't see that too much anymore, because I think they know they played it straight Fox News has. Fox News certainly does, on the commentary side, on the political analyst side, have its biases. No doubt about that. But if you watch, for example, Shep Smith in the middle of the day, as I've occasionally caught, you would absolutely be disabused of any notion that Fox News is completely in the tank, for example, for either the GOP, for conservatives, or whatever the case may be. You watch MSNBC, it's so bad, folks. Oh, my God. It's just I've tried to drop into MSNBC sort of just to monitor what the enemy is doing, I guess you could say. And I caught Lawrence O'Donnell the other night, and it was just unbelievable. Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, obtains information to the effect that, yes, the president-elect had been surveilled after the election, had been surveilled, incidental surveillance, as they would like to call it. I don't care what kind of surveillance. The bottom line is that we know that there are very crafty and devious folks who have access to these levers of power, who are part of this combine of intelligence and underworld, sort of underworld in the sense that they're hidden from view. They operate behind closed doors. There's a lot of coordination going on. You frankly see it with the Democratic Party, with what they've come out with in the recent weeks. It's very coordinated. They send their flacks out like Adam Schiff, this cad from California, the bug-eyed weirdo who stands up and just announces that Roger Stone has been coordinating and cooperating, whatever, with the Russians. No evidence whatsoever. You have a single exchange between Stone and this Gusever 2.0, who's not even definitively proven to be a Russian anything, much less that they know the identity of the person. I would say, based on what I've seen, it's probably a 50-50 chance that Gusever 2.0 has Russian contacts or is a Russian front. But Schiff stands up in the hearing, and we've got statement after statement in the transcripts of the House committee hearings in which Schiff, this guy's Sawwell, I can't remember his name, from I believe it's Virginia, some young upstart congressman who just peddling garbage, pure, unsubstantiated, fact-free garbage, speculative. They are just trying to muddy the waters. They are trying to throw chum in the waters so that the media sharks who do their bidding can circle and continue to push this, and anything at any price, any cost, doesn't matter who the casualties are, to sabotage President Donald Trump, to sabotage his agenda, to sabotage what he said he was going to do and promised he would do. In the election, he promised to the American people such things as health care would be Obamacare, the Obama monstrosity, the Obamanation healthcare system would be repealed and replaced. Personally, I think it should just be repealed. I think what we had before was better than what we have now, even with its all warts and all. But interestingly, the House Intelligence Committee has these hearings, and we see all this Sturm and Drang surrounding, the Russian collusion in the Trump campaign, right in the middle of attempting to repeal Obamacare. And the Democrats sit back fat and sassy, proud of their handiwork, proud of their evil deeds and their defamation campaign against people who have nothing to do with the Russians any more than your average Joe in the street would have anything to do with Russians. I mean, when you go and onto Twitter and have a private exchange with someone who's a hacker weeks after this hacker released documents from WikiLeaks or similarly that would indicate basically pulling the mask off the reality of the Democratic Party and mainly the Clinton campaign, John Podesta being one of them, how backstabbing and cutthroat they are, how there's no honor among thieves, and exposing their dirty laundry. Donna Brazile, who recently had to finally come clean about her feeding questions to the candidate before the town hall in CNN. All this stuff, but brought out really disgustingly, and it's just trash.
This is Richard Milhouse Nixon, and the Cold War may be over, but the stone cold truth is still around. And I give you my buddy, Roger Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President. You're back on the Stone Cold Truth, broadcasting from the Stone Zone here in an undisclosed location in South Florida. And now we're going to turn to the hottest topic in today's news, really dominating the news and dramatically changing the political situation in America literally overnight. See, this demonstrates why in politics and in world affairs, a day is a lifetime. No longer will Democrats be able to claim with any credibility that Donald Trump is soft on Russia. The strike in Syria has changed the political landscape dramatically, particularly in that sense. Now, the charge was absurd to begin with because, you see, it was the Clinton-Obama administration that was soft on Russia. The demonstration of that, of course, is the technology transfers that the Obama administration agreed to early in their first term, which probably should never have taken place at all, but continued after Putin rolled into Crimea, after Putin rolled into Syria. We did nothing. Was it because Hillary and her mob, including John and Tony Podesta, were making literally millions from their business deals with Putin's ruling clique, the oligarchs surrounding the dictator? The gas deal, the banking deal, the uranium deal. Yes, Tony and John got very wealthy. And that's exactly what I meant when I tweeted on August 14th that John Podesta's time in the barrel would come. Those who say that that somehow foreshadowed future hacking of Podesta's email by WikiLeaks, well, that is a damnable, bald-faced lie. In fact, I never said that anywhere. There is no evidence to that effect. Now, trying to see the Syrian airstrikes in some perspective, I am one who has argued almost for the last 2 years that the election of Donald Trump was a break with the neocon past, with 30 years of bad decision-making, and that the Bush-Clinton, Bush-Obama continuum was done. In terms of marching this country off to endless foreign wars, that Donald Trump, while he is not an isolationist and never was, is, in fact, and is still, in my opinion, a non-interventionist. There is, I must concede, a substantial difference between this one-time strike, which has changed the geopolitical situation overnight, and a boots-on-the-ground war. I was taken today by an important piece in Forbes by Paul Coyer, a contributor. It's so good that I'm going to read it. I don't agree with all of it, and I'll come back with my interpretation at the end. Here it is. President Trump's action last night, striking with 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles, a Syrian military airbase that had been the source of a chemical weapons attack against a rebel-controlled village on Tuesday, has not only punished Syrian dictator Bashar Assad for the use of chemical weapons, but put the broader region and the rest of the world on notice that the United States would now back its words with action. This will, in fact, have an impact far beyond Syria. According to the Syria Observatory for Human Rights, 72 people, more than half of which were women and children, were killed in the attack on a rebel-controlled village in northern Syria using the nerve agent gas sarin, an attack traced to the Syrian military airbase that was struck by the United States 2 days ago. Such attacks were also carried out by aircraft under the direction of the Assad regime on March 25th and 30th. The U.S. action was proportionate, surgical, targeting only the airbase from which Tuesday's chemical weapons attacks were launched, and therefore very limited. President Trump's action, in addition to being a forceful defense of international norms that will serve as a deterrent to future regimes tempted to use such weapons, is a significant step towards reestablishing American credibility after 8 years in which the world had been accustomed to a Washington that did not back up its rhetoric with a willingness to take action when it was necessary. Speaking loudly and carrying a small stick, an apology there to Teddy Roosevelt, is a sure formula for a loss of credibility and influence, and when the nation losing the credibility is one of the most responsible for maintaining global order, bad things tend to happen. As we have seen for the several past years around the globe, the world has become a much more dangerous place over the past 8 years for several reasons, but in no small part due to the American retrenchment as well as a perception that the American president would talk a tough game and then consistently back down and do little or nothing in the face of challenges. The result of this lack of respect with which revisionist powers held the Obama administration was readily seen in the increasingly muscular and successful challenges to international norms and the international order. That bothers me a bit. From the Russians' actions in Crimea, eastern Ukraine, and elsewhere, to China's actions now in the East and South China Seas. This includes Iran's activities throughout the Middle East. In the case of Syria, not to act in the face of such a blatant disregard for repeated warnings against the use of chemical weapons, not to mention Assad's own commitment not to use them, and the fact that he was supposedly giving them up to the Russians in August of 2013, would have confirmed that the new leadership in Washington could be ignored just as the old leadership was ignored, and the bad actors of the world had been accustomed to not taking the previous administration seriously. Russia, China, and the fact that the Chinese president was visiting Trump at the time of his bombing has surely helped to maximize the lesson. And the North Koreans, the Iranians, and others now understand that Donald Trump will back American words with action. Well, I do think, as one who is a non-interventionist, that the events here have had a dramatic effect on the domestic political scene as well as the international political scene. We'll be right back, and I will give you my analysis of the Forbes piece. I want to react to several of the things that I just read, because while I have decided to support the short-term action, I don't want boots on the ground. I know the generals are trying to convince the president to move to a wider war. And we'll talk about why that would be a cataclysmic mistake. Stay tuned. You're at the...
This is the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and you are tuned in Roger Stone on the Stone Cold Truth.
Welcome back to the Stone Cold Truth. We're broadcasting from the Stone Zone, an undisclosed location, our studio in South Florida. In the studio with us today is Gary Peanut Butter Parenti, a legend in Western New York politics, and my longtime friend, Stephen Grover Pidgeon, Stephen G. Pidgeon, named after Grover Cleveland, one of the greatest presidents.
Also a former mayor of Buffalo.
A former mayor of Buffalo. More importantly, a former sheriff of Buffalo.
That's right.
Sheriffs, that's where the real power in America lies. Steve is joining us in the studio to talk a little New York politics. I want to start with the comments of a prominent New Yorker. What is your analysis, Steve, of what U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, a man I know you know well, meant when he warned the president that he should not mess with the intelligence agencies because, if I quote, they have 7 days to Sunday to get back at you. That would seem to imply that the senator knows that the CIA and the FBI are not under civilian control, that they have their own political agenda.
It certainly appears to me that it's the unelected intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies that seem to be running the political people rather than the other way around. It's kind of gone over the line, and I think it was Chuck might have misspoke somewhat, but I think what it belies is it shows you that he himself would be nervous about having the intelligence agencies wanting to get him.
Yeah, it really does he did show probably more there than he wanted to. It's like pulling back the curtain and showing the American people how things really work. Now, I follow the New York Post because, of course, I'm a political junkie, and I think it is one of the greatest newspapers in the country. If you want a capsulized view of what's going on, it's a tabloid format. And, of course, I like their editorial page generally, not always. But I'm interested in the dynamics between New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and a man you know well, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, one of the most resilient and determined politicians that I've ever met. And I guess I have two questions. How do you see that relationship? Is it as swords point as the New York Post and the Daily News would have us believe? And what are the prospects for re-election individually of both of them?
Well, first off, I think that to some respect, there's always tension between the mayor of New York City and the governor of New York.
Certainly was true between, say, Lindsay and Nelson Rockefeller.
Right. And now, of course, you have more press outlets that will cover such things. But having said that, there clearly was points where it got very bad between the two of them. But it seems like whenever it comes to election time, if you remember in Andrew Cuomo's 14 race, Bill de Blasio helped him get the Working Families Party and worked very hard for his reelection. So I think while tempers may flare, when it comes down to the end of the day, I'd be surprised if the governor would get that involved in a city race. What de Blasio clearly wanted to be was the leader of the left nationally. He wanted to be a strong national voice on the left, which is why he held off his endorsement of Hillary Clinton and dealt with a lot of people that were working with Bernie Sanders. But that ended up not working for him very well. He wanted to host a debate in Iowa, and nobody wanted to go to the debate. He held a debate, and nobody came. And the WikiLeaks hurt him in terms of the way the Clinton people were looking at him. And they were furious that he wasn't making the endorsement. The Sanders people apparently didn't have very much respect. So I think he's kind of his foray into being the national leader of the left has kind of failed. Now he has to run for re-election. So are the trains running? Is the garbage being picked up? Is snow being plowed? He's done that pretty well. There's a lot of talk about a potential primary, but I would think if it's not an Hakeem Jeffries or an Eric Adams or somebody that's a known entity, especially out of the black community, I would think they'll have a hard time beating him. As to whether it's to the governor's advantage now to get involved with that, I kind of doubt it, since he has his own problems with the left. Plans at this point, it seems like he's running for re-election, and it seems like there's some interested Republicans, so he really doesn't need a showdown with the left.
Yeah, I have to admit, one of the most bloodless things I've ever seen in politics, which I, of course, enjoyed, was the way that Mayor de Blasio assisted Governor Cuomo in getting the support of the Working Families Party. Andrew Cuomo vowed to help remove Republican control of the Senate, got their endorsement, then did absolutely nothing in that regard. It was bloodless.
A Democratic Senate run by the Liz Krugers of the world would not only be horrible for New York State if that's that group in charge. He really needs that mainstream, moderate, independent Democratic group to stay in place. Otherwise, you see what happened when John Sampson and Lynn Kruger were running the Senate. Things were pretty screwed up. Yeah. You and I were involved in that a little bit. But I think Cuomo does not need a fight from his left when he's going to have probably a pretty well, and I assume the White House would have reason to want to see a Republican candidate for governor. He'll have a real Republican this time, not an Astorino who really was never really able to put much together.
Look, I think Astorino ran an extraordinarily good race considering that he had no money, and he got 40+% of the vote.
But I would think that's my point. I think you'll see more of a resource-based race next time.
There's actually
look, third terms are hard anyway.
Yes, indeed,
so,
and we've seen
even
that.
though his numbers are good in general, but I don't know if the enthusiasm level for a third term is always difficult. So I think he'll have a real race out of Republicans this time. The last things he needs is a battle from the left, and the mayor trying to cause him problems from the left.
Yeah, no, his victory in the Democratic primary over a woman whose name I can barely remember, a school teacher.
Zephyr Teachout.
Yes, not exactly a household name, was unimpressive, but
right.
solid, but unimpressive. Andrew Cuomo is a moderate. In fact, he's not really a flaming liberal. He's center-left, but I also think he understands the Democratic Party.
And he's done a great job, getting what he needs out of the state legislature. His late budget was 6 days. It used to be months.
Unfortunately, there has been no uptick in the jobs that he promised us. If I were the Republican candidate, that would be my campaign. It would simply be, hey, Andrew, where are the jobs? Because that hasn't happened. The economy of upstate New York is still a basket case. That, I think, is probably his greatest challenge.
Right.
I have always been a friend and an admirer of Joe Percoco, who I'm going to say that he's an honest guy.
I think so, too, by the way.
And that I hope for him and his family that the accusations against him are false. I don't like to see anybody, Republican or Democrat, go through what he and his family are going through. But I would think...
how many wives, how many spouses of government officials work for lobbying groups? I mean, it seems like it's a bit of a stretch what they're doing to him. But.
Well, and how can you look at, say, Eric Schneiderman and his relationship with a woman who very clearly doesn't register as a lobbyist but does heavy-duty lobbying, and why has there been no enforcement on that question? New York Democratic politics is always Byzantine. That's why I'm glad we had Steve Pigeon from Buffalo, New York, here to help sort it out for us. You've been on the Stone Cold Truth. One final word. I want you to take a look at A Man and His Presidents, The Political Odyssey of William F. Buckley Jr. by Alvin S. Felsenberg. I finished this book last night. I polished it off literally in a day. It is one of the best reads I have had. My thanks to Josh Kaplan from Vessel News. My thanks to Steve Pigeon from Western New York, a legend in Democratic circles. And I thank you for joining us here at the Stone Cold Truth on the Genesis Communications Network. Tune in next week.
This is the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and you are tuned in Roger Stone on the Stone Cold Truth.
Thank you, Reverend Jesse Jackson. You're back, as he said, on the Stone Cold Truth, broadcasting from a secret, undisclosed location in South Florida. We call it the Stone Zone. We could tell you where it was, but then, of course, we'd have to kill you, as the old joke goes. And now I want to focus on the power struggle that is going on in the Trump White House. Now, I make no bones about the fact that Steve Bannon is a friend and ally of mine, that I have written for Breitbart News, that Steve and I, generally speaking, share a worldview. We are anti-globalist. We are opposed to the established order. We are certainly opposed to the continuation of the Bush-Clinton, Bush-Obama continuum that has brought us endless war, massive debt and spending and borrowing, erosion of our civil liberties through the Patriot Act and the FISA court, with which I've had some recent experience, I suspect. We both recognize that our current immigration system has left our borders porous and has made our streets and neighborhoods unsafe. And one can only conclude that the purpose of our foreign policy under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was to embolden and strengthen and empower the Muslim Brotherhood while undercutting all of our allies, including Israel, including Mubarak in Egypt, including, yes, Gaddafi in Libya. It's interesting to me that in Libya, prior to regime change, that women could own property, women could go to college, women could drive a car, women could choose their own husband, women could travel without the approval of their husband, women could be seen in public without a veil. Today, those things are illegal and would get a woman stoned to death. Are you proud, Hillary Clinton? Are you proud, Huma Abedin? Huma's mother, who she calls a feminist, is the #1 advocate for genital mutilation, and Huma and her parents are directly tied to Sheikh Omar Abdul Nassif, who financed the Institute of Minority Muslim Affairs, which praised the Muslim Brotherhood, and blamed the attacks of 9/11 on the United States. That's Huma. That's her. No, Mr. Bannon and I share this worldview. Yet, sadly, Steve has played no role in bringing other anti-globalists to the Trump White House. He has unfortunately not expended his political capital to assist other pro-Trump globalists, many of whom worked in the campaign, in joining the administration. And now, when the globalist faction, headed by presidential son-in-law Jared Kushner and his running dog lackeys Dina Powell, a Bushite who despises Donald Trump, and Gary Cohen, an alum from Goldman Sachs who openly bragged that he would have this job whether Hillary Clinton was elected or Donald Trump was elected. Well, sadly, Steve has left himself no allies. I am hopeful that he will survive. But at the end of the day, many people question, well, how could he topple, how could he take on the president's son-in-law? Let's remember, Donald Trump is a man who fired his own brother. Donald Trump is interested in making America great, and he's interested in the success of this administration. I have nothing against Jared Kushner. I think I've met the man once. But I don't understand how he could understand the broader coalition that elected Donald Trump, because indeed, Mr. Kushner is a liberal Democrat from a prominent New Jersey family of liberal Democrats, major financiers of abortion on demand, by the way, and crazy pro-abortion organizations like NARAL. So how he could understand the Trump coalition and the damage being done to it with various policies, I don't understand. Yet my confidence continues to lie in Donald J. Trump, a man I've known for 40 years, a man I worked for on and off in that period, who has an uncanny ability to see the big picture and to come up with practical ideas that are common sense based to make America great again. Let's take, for example, the fact that he has not backed off his absolute intention to repeal Glass-Steagall, perhaps the greatest economic mistake made by President Bill Clinton, which combined commercial and institutional banking in such a way to cause economic calamity and hardship in this country. Glass-Steagall will be restored. This is one of the single most important pledges that Donald Trump has made. And whether or not we have a complete house cleaning at the White House remains to be seen. Now, for reasons that perplex me, Mr. Bannon seems to have aligned himself with Reince Priebus, the former Republican national chairman. This is the same Reince Priebus who shifted funds away from the Trump campaign in Pennsylvania, as much as $750,000 in the closing weeks, shifting them to the U.S. Senate candidacy of Pat Toomey, who took a similar number and shifted those funds in Virginia to a Senate race and took them away from the presidential campaign of Donald Trump, probably costing us Virginia. Mr. Priebus has peopled the White House with establishment Republicans who never supported Donald Trump's candidacy for the nomination, and few of whom actually supported his candidacy in the general election. Well, when one goes to bed with dogs, one will almost invariably wake up with fleas. Don't be shocked when the White House leaks, and when those leaks do not show the President of the United States in the best light. So, Stone's predictions. Mr. Priebus will not survive. Mr. Bannon, his survival is a question mark. And whether or not Jared Kushner continues to be the force that he is today will have much to do with the success of the Trump administration. As much as Donald Trump disdains polls in terms of spending money on them, he does not disdain their results, and he does watch them carefully. Now, many have pointed out to me that the very same pollsters that show him with a historically low approval rating are the same exact pollsters who said that he cannot win. Well, they were wrong then, and they may well be wrong now, yet he will have to judge whether or not he has a governing coalition, whether the polls reflect a strong enough political situation in the country where he has a mandate, no matter how narrow, to govern. And if not, all of those who work for Donald Trump will learn that they are expendable. I remember seeing on the cover of, I believe it was Forbes, perhaps it was Business Week, a picture of Jared Kushner in the headline, "This is the man who elected Donald Trump." No. Donald Trump is the man who elected Donald Trump. There is no Karl Rove figure in the Trump world. There is no indispensable aide. Donald Trump elected Donald Trump in a sheer exercise in physical will and a perception that the American people were fed up with politics as usual. And therefore, keep an eye on the struggles in the White House, because I predict change, big change, is going to come, and soon. We'll be right back at the Stone Cold Truth here on the Genesis Communications Network.
Roger Stone, New York Times best-selling author, brings you...
I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
That Donald J. Trump has been selected as a Republican Party nominee for President of the United States.
And I promise you that I will not let you down. We will do a great job. We will do a great job. And I can only say that while the campaign is over, our work on this movement is now really just beginning.
The Making of the President 2016. How Donald Trump orchestrated a revolution. Find out more at stonecoldtruth.com. stonecoldtruth.com.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Roger Stone, on the Stone Cold Truth, here proudly on the Genesis Communications Network. We've been talking about Syria and the strikes there. We've been talking about the contretemps inside the Trump White House. Apparently a struggle between the globalists and those who support Donald Trump's original vision for running for president. And joining us now is my friend Josh Kaplan, who is a correspondent for the Gateway Pundit, a terrific liberty-oriented website, and also founder of Vessel News. Now, Josh broke a little noticed story last week when the Russian foreign minister spokesperson said that the Russians had in their possession information that could prove highly embarrassing to the Obama administration. Josh Kaplan, welcome to the Stone Cold Truth. Why don't you tell us about this story, and then let's analyze whether the Russians under Vladimir Putin still have motivation to utilize this information in view of the recent Syrian strikes.
Roger, thank you for having me. There was a little-known story, as you just stated, that broke March 23rd when Maria Zakharova, who's the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, was asked a question whether or not the status of current Russian-American affairs was on the onset going to be a positive working relationship between Trump and Putin or not. She gave a rather long-winded response, multiple paragraphs, roughly about 500, 700 words if you read the transcript. And right at the very bottom, the second to last paragraph was an eye-opening quote for me that said, also, I would like to say that the practice of leaking information that concerns not just the United States but also Russia, which has become a tradition in Washington, is that in the past few years we continue to see leaks when the media will publish things that are out of Washington that we want to keep a secret. And for example, if these things continue to happen, the things that have happened under President Obama's term will come to light. And believe me, this could be very interesting information. So that quote completely blew me away. I didn't see anybody in the Russian or Western media publish this, which is quite interesting because if you think about it, this is playing right into the anti-Russian Trump narrative. And nobody had reported on it. I put it together on the Gateway Pundit an hour later, and the story did very, very well for him. It got around to David Knight over at InfoWars, did a great piece on it. The American Mirror, Kyle Olson picked it up. But aside from that, it really did not get any mainstream media attention, which was quite surprising.
Well, prior, of course, to the Syrian strikes, some would have argued, you see, here is proof that the Russians want to benefit the Trump administration and humiliate the Obama administration. It's amazing to me the way the national political dynamic has changed overnight. Does anyone in their right mind now believe that Donald Trump is soft on the Russians? The Russians' reaction to the bombing in Syria was one of fury, of anger. And therefore, I guess, in my view, the dialogue has changed so sweepingly, I now doubt seriously whether I will be called to the House or Senate Intelligence Committees to testify. And that would be very upsetting to me because I believe, of course, that I have been defamed. Just to reiterate for the 999th time, I never had any contact with the Russian state. And I believe during the campaign or before the campaign, and I believe that the entire narrative of Russian collusion to assist Trump is a falsehood, is a canard, is a cover story designed by John Podesta to divert attention from his own business dealings with Putin's ruling clique of oligarchs, the gas deal, the uranium deal, the bank deal, ad nauseum. Then this narrative is picked up by the deep state, by the intelligence services, deeply upset about the fact that Hillary Clinton cannot deliver the full-scale war that they favor in Syria, the broad expansion of the current proxy war, and therefore designed to destabilize Donald Trump. I dare say if Trump doesn't give them the full war they want, if he does what I think he should do, allow his action in Syria to stand as a surgical strike which served a number of useful purposes in terms of the international geopolitics, I doubt that the Russian narrative can go forward with any credibility unless it is reginned up by the deep state when Trump refuses to give them their wider boots on the ground war. Josh, what's your analysis?
Well, I think that the deep state, the globalists, are so invested in the narrative that Donald Trump and the Russian government have collaborated prior to the election and post the election to make sure that they're able to achieve whatever means that they see fit, and that they're going to double down. My view on this is that they're going to try to continue to gin up negative press between Donald Trump and Putin, continue to try to create linkages between these two parties because they are so invested. You've got the likes of Adam Schiff that has just completely destroyed his credibility, if he even had any, over the past number of weeks, smearing members of the Trump clique. And this has just really been something of an embarrassment to watch. If you are just a lover of the country, something to step back and to say, wow, I love the country. I could be a conservative or a liberal, but to see one of the major political parties in the United States operating in such a nefarious manner, ginning up all of these so-called fake, phony scandals between Trump and Putin has just been terrible to watch for political discourse and confidence in the political process. One of the interesting bright points that I want to point out is that there are still elements within the Russian government, specifically the Russian foreign ministry, that still believe that there is a distinct difference between Donald Trump, the anti-globalists, we'll say the pro-nationalist group, the Bannons, the Trumps, the Stephen Millers, and a distinction between them, between Gary Cohen, Kushner's Ivanka, and Dina Powell. And the reason why I say that is that just recently, in the past few hours, Zakharova went on Russian television and was asked what her view was, the official view of the Russian Foreign Ministry's view of this strike. And yes, the rhetoric has been hot from the Russian side, but she said something really interesting. And she said that despite these strikes that the U.S. military has put forth, that shows that America, quote unquote, is an unpredictable state. She says that the modus operandi behind it shows that the political and military class is still upset about the election results. And that's a fascinating quote because that paints a clear picture between Donald Trump and the deep state and the belief within the Russian foreign ministry that there are elements within the American government that pushed this strike and trying to bring tension between the governments of Russia and the United States.
I continue to believe, Josh, that Donald J. Trump is our best prospect for peace, and that negotiation, no matter how difficult, is always superior to confrontation if one can get a just détente. You've been listening to Josh Kaplan of Vessel News here at the Stone Cold Truth. He's going to stick with us and join on the other side, but you're at the right place if you want to find out what's really going on in Washington, what's really going on in the Trump White House, what's really happening at Mar-a-Lago. You're tuned in to the Stone Cold Truth here on the Genesis Communications Network. And we'll be right back with Josh Kaplan. More truth and more of the Stone Cold Truth.
This is Richard Milhouse Nixon, and the Cold War may be over, but the stone cold truth is still around. And I give you my buddy, Roger Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're here with Josh Kaplan of Vessel News. Josh, I want to ask you about Chairman Devin Nunes stepping down. Now, I think Nunes is a patriot, and I think that he was right to break out and present to the American people information that indicated that, contrary to what FBI Director Comey and Admiral Rogers, formerly the NSA, told a House committee under oath, there was in fact surveillance of Donald Trump and Trump Tower. And I predict that we're going to learn that there is more than has been disclosed so far. But I guess my question is, how do you see the future of that probe? If you're right that the Democrats are going to double down on Russia, they will do so to their own detriment, in my view. And I take some comfort in the fact that Trey Gowdy and Tom Rooney, people who are both attorneys and have served as prosecutors, will now head this probe. I'm not taking anything away from Nunes, but he doesn't have that public policy experience. What do you think?
Well, I think that they're going to find Nunes to be an easier opponent than someone like Trey Gowdy, who, as you mentioned, was an amazing prosecutor and has a brilliant legal mind and has a laser sharp tongue. So I think that the silver lining in having Nunes step down may have brought down a little bit of the temperature. People believe on both sides that it may have been a little bit politicized, but I think that bringing in Trey Gowdy will bring a more serious, independent tone that I think may have been missing from the narrative associated with Nunes. And optics is everything. So even though we know that Nunes was on the right side of things and crossed all of his T's and dotted his I's, I think that this will be a step in the right direction. In addition to that, what we're going to see now is so many of the pieces of information that have been hidden for so long, whether it be Susan Rice's involvement in trying to spy on some of the members of the Trump team, and then we're going to start to go up the chain. This is going to start to go higher and higher and higher. Will Ben Rhodes be implicated in this? Will Valerie Jarrett, who, in my opinion, may be the closest linkage between herself and the president, will she be implicated in this? A Fox News report that came out not too long ago stated that some of the information that was collected had something to do with everyday life factoids. Now, that's very private information, and it'd be very interesting to see what is rendered from that. So I think that there's going to be more heated rhetoric from the government media complex, the elements that are still within the Trump administration that are stayovers from Obama, collaborating with the other side of the government media complex, the Maggie Habermans of the New York Times, the Glenn Thrushes of the New York Times, and continue to churn out fake news. And that is one of the most unpredictable aspects of this whole narrative, is we wake up and we never know what the media is going to come out with next. And so many folks, I would say on the right, were unsure of this tension between Bannon and Kushner, and you came out bravely, despite being one of the staunchest Trump supporters long before many even thought about Donald Trump being president. And you said that there is a serious issue between Kushner and Bannon, and Kushner is leaking information to Joe Scarborough of MSNBC. And Roger, I curated that piece that you did with Alex Jones from the Washington Examiner because they had transcribed that discussion. We put it on vesselnews.io, and the thing flew. And then the next few days, I got emails saying, you guys were right, because now all of a sudden the watershed has come, and there was a slew of stories from both the mainstream and alternative media talking about how there was true tension between Bannon and Kushner. And this is really an ideological war that's part of a greater theme within the early days of the Trump administration. So I think it's going to manifest, Roger, in the form of fake news, which is completely unpredictable, but in terms of its content, but predictable in regards to where it will derive from. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Pelosi and Schumer cabal try to navigate this fake news narrative with somebody like Trey Gowdy leading the way.
Well, it's very rare that this happens in American politics, but I actually have two sources, one in the Scarborough camp, one in the Trump camp close to Jared Kushner, who have confirmed for me an active text chain between the president's son-in-law and Joe Scarborough. Scarborough said last week that there was something deeply wrong with Donald Trump. He was questioning the president's mental health. Is that really the kind of guy you should be trafficking with? And the various attacks that Joe Scarborough has leveled on Bannon came directly from Jared Kushner via text. That is the stone cold truth. So I did realize that this was the forerunner, if you will, of the open warfare that we now see in the White House. One of the things I learned working for previous presidents and in previous presidential campaigns is that a house divided against itself, whether it's a White House or a campaign for the White House, will not stand, cannot be sustained, that everyone must sublimate their agenda to the agenda of the candidate and later the president. You cannot have personal agendas. Everybody has to be pulling in one direction. And when they are not, the result is defeat. The result is a disaster. We have seen it again and again. I am kind of delighted that Nunes is stepping down. A selfless act will allow the hearings to go forward because we need to hear what Susan Rice has to say. We should ask the FBI director and Admiral Rogers, the NSA director, to come back to the committee and explain why they lied in their previous appearance before the committee. We need to ask them specifically about Operation Dragnet, which was approved in 2004 under the NSA, in which the government has, in fact, listened to, monitored, and recorded the conversations of some 600 prominent and not so prominent Americans, including Donald Trump. Did this surveillance ever end? We know for a fact that it continued into the Obama administration. So, many thanks to Josh Kaplan with Vessel News for joining us here on the Stone Cold Truth. Coming up in the balance of the hour, we have legendary Western New York Democratic Politico and my longtime friend Steve Pigeon, and we're going to talk some New York politics. Always interesting because the Big Apple remains the communications and financial center of the universe. That's right, Steve Pigeon right here on the Stone Cold Truth. So, folks in Buffalo, I hope you're standing by. You're going to get a full, undiluted dose of the Stone Cold Truth.
This is Bernie Sanders, and you're listening to The Stone Cold Truth with Roger Stone.
That's right. We're back here at the Stone Cold Truth. Now, many of you know firsthand the effects of the new censorship being unleashed against conservatives, libertarians, and any supporters of President Donald Trump. For decades, many of us were not particularly concerned that venture capital was being expended almost exclusively on the left, on companies run by the left that have gotten preeminence in the blogosphere. Once established, many of these largest companies then began a symbiotic relationship with the Obama administration and the deep state, which allowed them to grow into juggernauts that they are today. Facebook, Twitter, Google, and their property YouTube have all all but locked up social media interaction on the internet. The old antitrust description fits most appropriately. These are monopolies. And as monopolies, these left-leaning organizations, well, they can tilt public discourse in directions of their choosing via a variety of nefarious yet hidden methods. Terms have been invented to describe the censorship activities we're talking about that are being conducted by the tech left. They call it throttling, shadow bans, troll bots, SJW puppets, fake news flagging, and many more being invented almost every day. All of this activity boils down to one single objective: limiting the reach for voices of dissent. Make no mistake about it, their technologies work, their methods are effective. We at the Stone Cold Truth have watched our audience go up month after month, literally reaching hundreds of thousands of people at the end of the 2016 campaign and into January. Yet recently we've seen our reach go down month after month in a dramatic fashion. We've conducted actual A/B tests within tweets and Facebook posts and have watched both Twitter and Facebook stifle our content in real time. We know exactly what they're doing, and we're not alone. Using rugged American individualism, we've stood up to voices and ideology raised by the left. But in their desperation, the tech left is now slanting the playing field even further and further, to the point of breaking, in my opinion. Facebook and Twitter specifically have violated their own stated SEC-reported corporate charters. Both promise free and open platforms, and both are provably false. Google makes no such promises, but their de facto monopoly on search has given them a powerful position with which to abuse their power they have. The left have professional agitators by the thousands and brain trusts by the score that work together in purpose, if disparate in tactics. No such organizational structure exists on the right. The organization that has substantial duty to help counter such onslaughts is the Republican Party, and they seem to be MIA. When I had a brief discussion with the president on this some months ago, he was largely unaware of the issue. If there's anyone who should understand the challenge that we face, it would be Steve Bannon, a man who comes from alternative media. The tech left is extinguishing the passion and volunteer spirit that helped Donald Trump rise to prominence by using the very tactics the mainstream media has accused Russia of, using professional trolls to spread propaganda and disinformation, and by total media collusion. Now the left are in a panic. They were certain that Hillary would win. A striking case in point is the popular Showtime series Homeland. In the last season 6, filmed before the 2016 presidential election had been decided in a decisive victory by Donald Trump, a fictional character named Brett O'Keefe is introduced as an obvious take on my friend Alex Jones and alternative news. In several episodes, they show a clandestine building full of technologists who are using fake social media accounts to manipulate public opinion and spread fake news. This point plot, attributed to the alt-right and the deep state working together, is in fact precisely what is happening, but with the deep state in bed with the progressive left. David Brock, a left-wing hitman, a turncoat who was once a conservative, specifically, and his organization Media Matters for America, an apologist group that denies the rape and sexual assaults of Bill Clinton and the Clintons' other crimes, has taken the lead, gobbling up tens of millions of dollars over the past few years, building up exactly the kind of infrastructure that is fictionally portrayed on Homeland. A virtual army of trolls and misfits, and their complicit support of the tech left and the mainstream media, which they badger constantly, is the beast that we must defeat. Now, Brock gobbled up 30, 40 millions of dollars with nothing to show for it. And when I recently heard that he had had a heart attack, I wondered whether, in fact, it maybe was a hit on him by George Soros, pissed off about the fact that he gave the guy $30 million for which he was entirely ineffective. The silver lining, I guess, is that Donald Trump won the election and foiled all of the cleanup efforts that were needed to provide cover for this egregious ethical and legal violations that we see going on. It is antitrust. It is anti-competitive. One would hope that the Trump Justice Department would get the picture. But failing that, many on the left have opened themselves up to extreme legal liability. They were literally banking that Hillary could provide them with protection, with cover from repercussions and their actions. Twitter's most notable because they were brazen about their efforts and left noticeable trails pointing to their activities. The liability is the soft underbelly can be exploited to level the playing fields. Twitter made a giant gamble, and we will see that they have lost. Yes, I think that there will be a class action lawsuit, and this will be David versus Goliath. The kind of lawsuit won't be cheap, and it won't be easy, and it will be hard fought. But I'm confident that we can challenge those who favor Stalinist-like censorship in the courts. We believe that Twitter executives, their insurance providers, and their shareholders will endeavor not to allow what the suit would uncover to see the light of day. It's my strong belief that the class, properly filed, will be paid off in settlement, with the appropriate money be distributed to the class and the remainder used to fund new, additional, alternative media. Yes, I will be announcing more about this shortly. You see, the left are not going to back down. They're doubling down. They're watching generations' worth of sacrifice go up in smoke. If the liberty-minded patriots who listen to this program seize the opportunity to mount a counter-effort that has the possibility of crippling those who would censor our free speech and kill the First Amendment, then Donald Trump will get reelected, and we will continue to have a vibrant, robust alternative media. This is the greatest challenge that we face, because it is only the shift of power to the alternative media born of technological advances that have allowed Trump's election to begin with. It's over for the ABCs, NBCs, and CBSs. It's over for the CNNs and the Foxes. There's a new day in America that can only be derailed through Stalinistic-type censorship, the kind being pushed by David Brock and his posse of misfits. You've heard about it here at the Stone Cold Truth. You can read about it at Infowars.com in a series of excellent stories by Dr. Jerome Corsi, or at Newsmax. This is the single greatest challenge to those of us who are liberty-minded, and we're telling you about it here at the Stone Cold Truth. We'll be right back with political legend Steve Pigeon talking New York politics from the Stone Zone.
This is the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and you are tuned in Roger Stone on the Stone Cold Truth.
Welcome back to the Stone Cold Truth. We're broadcasting from the Stone Zone in an undisclosed location, our studio in South Florida. In the studio with us today is Gary Peanut Butter Parenti, a legend in Western New York politics, and my longtime friend, Stephen Grover Pigeon, Stephen G. Pigeon, named after Grover Cleveland, one of the greatest presidents.
Also a former mayor of Buffalo.
A former mayor of Buffalo. More importantly, a former sheriff of Buffalo.
That's right.
Sheriffs, that's where the real power in America lies. Steve is joining us in the studio to talk a little New York politics. I want to start with the comments of a prominent New Yorker. What is your analysis, Steve, of what U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, a man I know you know well, meant when he warned the president that he should not mess with the intelligence agencies because, if I quote, they have 7 days to Sunday to get back at you? That would seem to imply that the senator knows that the CIA and the FBI are not under civilian control, that they have their own political agenda.
It certainly appears to me that it's the unelected intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies that seem to be running the political people rather than the other way around. It's kind of gone over the line, and I think Chuck might have misspoke somewhat, but I think what it belies is it shows you that he himself would be nervous about having the intelligence agencies wanting to get him.
Yeah, it really does he did show probably more there than he wanted to. It's like pulling back the curtain and showing the American people how things really work. Now, I follow the New York Post because, of course, I'm a political junkie, and I think it is one of the greatest newspapers in the country. If you want a capsulized view of what's going on, it's a tabloid format, and of course I like their editorial page generally, not always. But I'm interested in the dynamics between New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and a man you know well, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, one of the most resilient and determined politicians that I've ever met. And I guess I have two questions. How do you see that relationship? Is it as swords point as the New York Post and the Daily News would have us believe? And what are the prospects for re-election individually of both of them?
Well, first off, I think that to some respect, there's always tension between the mayor of New York City and the governor of New York.
Certainly was true between, say, Lindsay and Nelson Rockefeller.
Right. And now, of course, you have more press outlets that will cover such things. But having said that, there clearly was points where it got very bad between the two of them. But it seems like whenever it comes to election time, if you remember in Andrew Cuomo's 14 race, Bill de Blasio helped him get the Working Families Party and worked very hard for his reelection. So I think while tempers may flare, when it comes down to the end of the day, I'd be surprised if the governor would get that involved in a city race. What de Blasio clearly wanted to be was the leader of the left nationally. He wanted to be a strong national voice on the left, which is why he held off his endorsement of Hillary Clinton and dealt with a lot of people that were working with Bernie Sanders. But that ended up not working for him very well. He wanted to host a debate in Iowa, and nobody wanted to go to the debate. He held a debate, and nobody came. And the WikiLeaks hurt him in terms of the way the Clinton people were looking at him. And they were furious that he wasn't making the endorsement. The Sanders people apparently didn't have very much respect. So I think he's kind of his foray into being the national leader of the left has kind of failed. Now he has to run for re-election. So are the trains running? Is the garbage being picked up? Is snow being plowed? He's done that pretty well. There's a lot of talk about a potential primary, but I would think if it's not an Hakeem Jeffries or an Eric Adams or somebody that's a known entity, especially out of the black community, I would think they'll have a hard time beating him. As to whether it's to the governor's advantage now to get involved with that, I kind of doubt it, since he has his own problems with the left. Plans at this point, it seems like he's running for re-election, and it seems like there's some interested Republicans, so he really doesn't need a showdown with the left.
Yeah, I have to admit, one of the most bloodless things I've ever seen in politics, which I, of course, enjoyed, was the way that Mayor de Blasio assisted Governor Cuomo in getting the support of the Working Families Party. Andrew Cuomo vowed to help remove Republican control of the Senate, got their endorsement, then did absolutely nothing in that regard. It was bloodless.
A Democratic Senate run by the Liz Krugers of the world would not only be horrible for New York State if that's that group in charge. He really needs that mainstream, moderate, independent Democratic group to stay in place. Otherwise, you see what happened when John Sampson and Lynn Kruger were running the Senate.
Yes.
Things were pretty screwed up.
Yeah.
You and I were involved in that a little bit. But I think Cuomo does not need a fight from his left when he's going to have probably a pretty well, and I assume the White House would have reason to want to see a Republican candidate for governor. He'll have a real Republican this time, not an Astorino who really was never really able to put much together.
Look, I think Astorino ran an extraordinarily good race considering that he had no money, and he got 40+% of the vote.
But I would think that's my point. I think you'll see more of a resource-based race next time.
There's actually
look, third terms are hard anyway.
Yes, indeed,
so,
and we've seen
even
that.
though his numbers are good in general, but I don't know if the enthusiasm level for a third term is always difficult. So I think he'll have a real race out of Republicans this time. The last things he needs is a battle from the left, and the mayor trying to cause him problems from the left.
No, his victory in the Democratic primary over a woman whose name I can barely remember, a school teacher.
Zephyr Teachout.
Yes, not exactly a household name, was unimpressive, but solid, but unimpressive. Andrew Cuomo is a moderate. In fact, he's not really a flaming liberal. He's center-left, but I also think he understands the Democratic Party.
And he's done a great job, getting what he needs out of the state legislature. His late budget was 6 days. It used to be months.
Unfortunately, there has been no uptick in the jobs that he promised us. If I were the Republican candidate, that would be my campaign. It would simply be, hey, Andrew, where are the jobs? Because that hasn't happened. The economy of upper state New York is still a basket case. That, I think, is probably his greatest challenge.
Right.
I have always been a friend and an admirer of Joe Percoco, who I'm going to say that he's an honest guy.
I think so, too, by the way.
And that I hope for him and his family that the accusations against him are false. I don't like to see anybody, Republican or Democrat, go through what he and his family are going through. But I would think...
how many wives, how many spouses of government officials work for lobbying groups? I mean, it seems like it's a bit of a stretch what they're doing to him. But.
Well, and how can you look at, say, Eric Schneiderman and his relationship with a woman who very clearly doesn't register as a lobbyist but does heavy-duty lobbying, and why has there been no enforcement on that question? New York Democratic politics is always Byzantine. That's why I'm glad we had Steve Pigeon from Buffalo, New York, here to help sort it out for us. You've been on the Stone Cold Truth. One final word. I want you to take a look at A Man and His Presidents, The Political Odyssey of William F. Buckley Jr. by Alvin S. Felsenberg. I finished this book last night. I polished it off literally in a day. It is one of the best reads I have had. My thanks to Josh Kaplan from Vessel News. My thanks to Steve Pigeon from Western New York, a legend in Democratic circles. And I thank you for joining us here at the Stone Cold Truth on the Genesis Communications Network. Tune in next week.